Hello, Wonderhussy here, hanging out between Interstate 40 and the railroad tracks in the ghost town of Ludlow. That's right, Ludlow, California. I guess it's exit 50 off Interstate 40, sort of maybe halfway between Kingman and Barstow. If you've ever driven Interstate 40, well, you know how long and boring some stretches of it are. And Ludlow is one of the few places you can get off nowadays and get, I guess there's a couple gas stations over there. Apparently there's still like 10 or 15 people who live here, but I think they all work in the gas stations. And these crumbling old ruins are from a completely different era, before Ludlow was a ghost town and was actually a thriving community. Oh look, here comes the train. Like I said, I'm parked right between the railroad tracks and Interstate 40, where all the best things in life are. Like this amazing old building. I think this was a general store. According to one article I read online, it was the Murphy Brothers General Store. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like we'll be able to get upstairs to the second floor. And doubly unfortunately, the walls in here are just covered in pretty half-assed graffiti. Actually, I guess there is some halfway cool graffiti in here. Like this I appreciate because it's colorful and well executed. Look at that. Pretty creepy face of a guy staring out at us. And you might think it's a disgusting shame to vandalize a historic old building like the Murphy Brothers General Store with graffiti, but I actually think this adds to the building. You know, it's kind of like the soul of the building, or maybe even the soul of one of the Murphy brothers is watching us. It's just kind of weird because like there's this rail yard here and there's all these trucks parked, all these people bustling, going about their business, but I read online that there's the old Pioneer Cemetery right across the tracks, and I guess there used to be a road to get to it, but they closed it and now you're just allowed to walk across the tracks, which is really weird to me because usually they don't want you going anywhere near railroad tracks, but you can see there's a bunch of old abandoned buildings over there. I mean, look at this. There's some pretty substantial ruins left here, but then look over here. Now this is a real old railroad cabin. Look at this, made out of railroad ties. You know, out in these parts where there aren't exactly a lot of trees, they had to use whatever wood they had, and there were plenty of old railroad ties since we are right by the railroad. Wow, look how cool this little tiny railroad cabin. I mean, just very rough hewn, built out of rail ties, but they did stucco over it, so it's got a nice finished interior. Windows that look like they had shutters, which you would need because it gets real windy out here in the desert. So plenty of light, not a ton of space. One room cabin, had a little kitchen. Oh gosh, it looks like it even had a little bathroom. Look at this. Oh man, I guess that was a shower stall with a window in it. And then it looks like they even had indoor plumbing. How about that? Fancy. Oh, and look at the floor. Real nice hardwood floor. I mean, this little cabin, you might laugh at me for saying this, but I feel like I could easily live in a cabin this size. And I'm sure lots of you watching this video could pretty easily envision yourself moving into this quaint little fixer-upper. Just needs a few new windows and it'd be good to go. Okay guys, time to play Name That Car. Some kind of really boss old 60s station wagon. Looks like you can see a little bit of the emblem there. I think it was a country squire, right? Or wait, no, because you can see it was a country sedan. I'm familiar with a country squire, not so much a country sedan, but man, it's definitely from the good old days when cars were cars and you could pile the entire Little League team in the back seat and smoke a pack of cigarettes on the way to the drive-in with no problem. And probably even drink a 6-pack of beer while you were at it. Let's see if it says anything on the back. Oh yeah, it says Ford. You can barely make it out. So it was a Ford country sedan. Oh, here comes another train. Good thing I got off them tracks while I had the chance. Man, Ludlow ain't nothing to mess with. Okay, well, let's just take a quick peek inside this trailer before we leave. Try to see if we can figure out who would have lived in this godforsaken trailer in this even more godforsaken little ghost town right next to the railroad tracks. Man, you wouldn't have had very much peace and quiet in this thing, nor would you have had many amenities. I'm guessing whoever lived in here was on the run from the law, or at least just trying to avoid paying child support. Something like that. Okay, walking over to look for this cemetery, there's this fantastic lineup of classic Malaise era vehicles. There's so many of them, I can't go through them all, but you tell me what they are as I'm walking by. I mean, muscle cars, sedans, oh, there's some kind of little Datsun or something. There's a huge, beautiful boat. And then down here on the end, oh golly, looks like the Duke brothers done run into some trouble and scraped the Confederate flag clean off the General Lee. Actually, I'm pretty sure that's not a Charger, but I don't know cars super well. I just love the lines of these classic American cars. Unbelievable. Oh look, here's the closed road. I mean, I guess there's some kind of mine up this dirt road way up in them there hills somewhere that's still operational. And so my understanding from what I read online is there's this couple, a man and his wife, I guess, who own that mine and they also own this road. And they're the ones who maintain this cemetery. I want to say the names were Cindy and Doug. They took it upon themselves to kind of restore this old pioneer cemetery, which you can see is a pretty lonely, classic lonely desert cemetery. I mean, just a bunch of wooden crosses, baking in the sun. Not really any names. Oh, well, here's a name. And this one's made out of granite. Timothy R. Daly died June 12th, 1923, just over 100 years ago. Here's another one. Aurelia McCoy, but that's the only information. Like, what happened? Why did they never engrave her birth and death information? You know, it seems like at least her birth year would be in there waiting for her to die, but golly, that's kind of spooky. Here's one more. Our dear Guillermina Quezada, born September 4th, 1922, died November 8th, 1925. Oh no, only 3 years old. Gosh, back then kids used to die real young because I guess they didn't have vaccines for a lot of the common childhood diseases. But look, it looks like people still come here and leave little toys on her grave. Like there's this soggy teddy bear and these Barbies. Oh my gosh, have you ever seen what happens to a Barbie doll's face when it's left out in the sun? Well, if you haven't before now, you're about to. Look at that. Just bubbles and blisters up. It kind of reminds me of those women you see from Florida. You know what I mean? Anyway, it's nice that people at least come here and leave dolls and toys for little Guillermina Quezada, who died so long ago. I mean, she died almost 100 years ago too. And some of these graves in here must be even older, like these old wooden crosses, which I actually think is pretty interesting about these wooden crosses. I was reading online, this couple that kind of took it upon themselves to fix up this cemetery. I guess they had a friend who worked in the LA County Coroner's office, something like that, who helped them figure out and identify who was buried in all these places. And so they did make new wooden crosses for the graves that no longer had them. And I guess maybe they're the ones who put this fence up. But unfortunately, wouldn't you know, the federal government had something to say about all this. Okay, come to find out, when this couple bought that mining claim, or filed that mining claim, yeah, they own the mining claim, and yeah, they own the road, but the land that the cemetery is on apparently was BLM land, Bureau of Land Management, which is land owned and maintained by the federal government. Well, the federal government has a problem with people putting up crosses on federal property. And I actually understand that. I know it sounds like a dick move, but you know, we're supposed to have a separation of church and state in this country. And so I guess the BLM, the federal government, stepped in and told them they couldn't put up any more wooden crosses here because it was in violation of the separation of church and state. Now, come on. Really? I mean, this couple was just trying to fix up a busted old pioneer cemetery. It's not like they were trying to make some kind of religious statement. Well, the good news is, I guess when they looked at the maps, they realized that the cemetery was not on BLM land after all. It was on private property, and so the federal government couldn't say anything at all. And that couple was able to put up as many crosses as they wanted to, which is a good thing for people like me who like poking around old cemeteries. Okay, now we gotta take our lives in our hands and go back across these railroad tracks. And not just because there's an ungodly collection of rubble and ruins over here that I could probably literally spend hours going through. I mean, you can see foundations of several old buildings here and a bunch of old rusted out equipment, neat little bits and pieces of glass, shoes, and more badass old cars. Look at this, some kind of rusty old tower of car parts. Nope, none of that is the reason I wanted to come back to this side of the tracks. The reason I wanted to come back over here is to show you, look at these massive stacks of railroad ties. I mean, I guess they need to replace these things every so often, and when they do, they just pile them up at the side of the train tracks. I mean, we're just right below the railroad grade there, and there are literal mountains and mountains of old railroad ties. And you might be wondering, well, gee, Wonderhussy, what's so interesting about a bunch of old railroad ties? Well, this actually happens to be the site of the terminus of the T&T Railroad. Okay, I've talked about this T&T, Tonopah Tidewater Railroad. I guess if you're a rail fan, you maybe might have heard of it. An old historic rail line that went from Death Valley, or went through Death Valley, all the way up to Goldfield, Nevada. And it hauled all the sweet, juicy gold and ore down from Goldfield, and all the sweet, juicy borax from Death Valley down here to the rail line in Ludlow. That's right, then as now, Ludlow was a railroad town. And somewhere right out there in the desert is where the headquarters of the T&T Railroad were located. How about that? If you watched my video I made about the ghost town of Evelyn, where there's nothing left, well, that was on the T&T Railroad line, and I went into a little bit of the history of that railroad in that video. You can check that out if you're interested. But out here, gosh, you'd think there would be some kind of more substantial ruins or remains of what was once a grand and mighty, well, maybe neither grand nor mighty, but an interesting railroad. Actually, I don't think the T&T was ever grand or mighty. In fact, I think the nickname for T&T was tired and tardy, because I guess it didn't always run on time. Either way, it's a real bummer that there's that no trespassing sign, because back there behind it is where the headquarters to the T&T Railroad were. And so I'm curious where the old railroad grade is. You know, back here behind me, where we had to run across to go to the cemetery, that's the, I guess, Southern Pacific track. And so the T&T was built to haul ore to the Southern Pacific, where it could then be transported it to Los Angeles. So you think you would still be able to see the old T&T Railroad grade somewhere here. But all you can see is another train rolling in. And I guess I better get out of here because it's about to get real noisy again. So I'm just gonna make my way back down off of this railroad embankment and go check out some of the rest of the town. Okay, wow. Welcome to Ludlow 2.0. Okay, so even though Ludlow was founded back in 1882 as a railroad town, well, it was basically a water stop, okay? Back in the days of steam locomotives, they had to have these pit stops all along the tracks so they could add water to the boiler or whatever to, you know, get the steam going to power the locomotive. And so when they were traveling through these lonely desert stretches, there had to be these whole little towns that existed pretty much solely to provide water for the locomotive. But once the steam locomotive went the way of the dodo bird, well, there was no real reason for this town to exist anymore. You know, trains didn't have to stop to take on water. The T&T Railroad ceased operation in 1940. So what was to become of Ludlow? Well, say what you will about Ludlow, but they are nothing if not resourceful out here. When the federal government came along and put in Route 66, that's right, Ludlow is right smack dab on the side of historic Route 66, and you can still drive it to this day. Well, once Route 66 was built, Ludlow reinvented itself as a sort of traveler's rest stop. You know, kind of like the Baker, California of its day. If you've ever been to Baker with the world's tallest thermometer and the alien jerky store. Well, Ludlow must have been like the 1960s version of it. I mean, they had, looks like a boss old gas station. Again, use your imagination. Say it's 1962 and you guys are loaded up in your country Squire. You know, you got the whole Little League team in the back and you're smoking a pack of cigarettes and down in a 6-pack of beer, which I don't know how you would have opened those pull tabs while you were driving. But anyway, the good old days. Picture you need gas, or maybe you need to put some water in your radiator. So you pull up to this old gas station, which is now sadly padlocked, so we can't get in. But imaginations know no padlocks. And so we can imagine what you would have found on the shelves of, well, I don't even know, did gas stations have convenience stores attached to them back in the 60s, or is that like a modern thing? I mean, in my imagination, you know, mom pulls in, parks the country Squire or the country sedan, all the Little League team runs out while mom's sitting there smoking one last cigarette and belching. And then, you know, the store's probably full of Bazooka bubblegum, you know, ice cold Coca-Cola in glass bottles, Mary Jane's, I don't know, those old-timey candies. What did people stop and buy on road trips back in the 1950s and 1960s? There may be some of you watching this channel who actually remember having done a road trip back in those days. So tell us in the comments what you would have gone into this convenience store to buy. I mean, mom probably went in for another pack of cigarettes and an extra 6-pack. But what about the kids? Oh wow, what's over here? Some more little buildings tucked away behind the service station. Oh, maybe this is where the bathrooms were, you know? Yeah, this definitely looks like it was an old bathroom. I mean, yikes. Oh, dang, look at that super skinny cabinet. What do you guys think is going to be in a cabinet that skinny? My guess was, I thought it was a shower stall, but the only person I can imagine taking a shower in here would be Karen Carpenter. And she is in no condition to be taking a shower. Oh, I guess it was just a weird, skinny storage closet. Okay, enough in the old turlets. Let's check out some of these abandoned houses over here. Look at this one. Now, who do you suppose lived in here? Well, whoever it was liked to do their cooking on the front porch. And if the mom here was anything like our hypothetical mom in the station wagon, well, she probably wasn't using it to do much more than heat up TV dinners. Let's see what's inside. Oh man, look at this place. Couch is laying on its back. Nice. Spacious, sunny kitchen. Imagine standing at your sink, washing your dishes, and looking out the window at all that traffic passing by on Interstate 40. Actually, Interstate 40 wouldn't have been here. It would have been Route 66, and that would have been over on that side. So you would have had to look this way at all those boss old cars passing on Route 66. And I was kind of making a joke talking about looking out the window of the freeway, but if I had a view of Route 66 in its heyday, I would stand at the sink and wash dishes until the cows came home. You know what I mean? Anyway, this was a really nice kitchen. Look at that, the little pantry built in there in the corner. I mean, yeah, there's some real creepy graffiti on the walls, but again, at least it's well executed, you know what I mean? And then, yep, they did have indoor plumbing. They had a bathroom of their very own, which is moderately terrifying now, but look how cool the linoleum floor was. It's stuff like this that really gets my imagination fired up, and you know, then I start having an idea of, you know, who designed this? Who picked this linoleum pattern? Was it the same woman who picked that, well, I was gonna say shower curtain, but it's like a little valance hanging over top of where the shower curtain was at one time. Look at the hooks from the old shower curtain are still in here. Isn't that wild? I mean, this place is a trip. But that's not the only building over here in Ludlow 2.0. This, I think, was the old Pendergrass Hotel, and I think it dates from like 1920. Wow, you can just walk through this whole building. Look how creepy this is. Old electrical conduit hanging down like a hangman's noose. Love stuff like that. But yeah, look, it's a long hallway that I guess at one time would have been lined with bedrooms. Like, there was a room. There was a room. I mean, on either side of this hallway, there were rooms going all the way down. Oh, I gotta back up because we came in the back door. So let's go back out onto the front porch. and put on our imagination hats and imagine we're walking into the Pendergrass Hotel back in 1920. Okay, we just finished motoring. We're motoring west on the National Trails Highway in our Model T Ford. And you know, those things can only go so many miles a day. And so you pull it, well, first you pull in over there to get topped off with gas and your radiator fluid. And then you come across the street here to see about getting a room for the night. And you're probably wearing a very smart traveling suit with a little cloche hat if you're a woman. If you're a guy, you're wearing a very nice suit and tie. People didn't roll around in stuff like I do. You know, folks took pride in their appearances back then. So you come into this front room and you can see there's a door on that side and a door on that side. So I guess this was like the lobby. You know, there's probably some cool couches, chairs, maybe a really cool Tiffany lamp, light fixture. I don't know how fancy this place was. But you know, say the desk clerk was over here on this side. You write your name in the book. You pay your $3 or whatever it cost for a room back then. And then you get your key and you walk down the hall to your room. Oh, look at this one. Almighty hell is here. Ooh, I hope that's not our room. No, our room is all the way here in the back. And we open the door and, oh no, golly, there's already someone staying here. Someone let I was gonna say a penguin, but I don't know what kind of bird that is in. Man, it's really fun, for me anyway, to imagine being all these different people in all these different eras, traveling along Route 66, you know? Lady from the 20s, suburban mom from the 60s. I'd actually really like to drive the entire length of Route 66 myself. Maybe I should try to do that this summer. I'll go to Chicago, and then I'll turn around, make a U-turn, and drive all the way back to Santa Monica, and stop at each and every interesting site along the way. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like to see. Okay, well now, next to the service station here, I guess there was some kind of a garage. You know, this, now that I think about it, looks like it would have been where the convenience store, or I don't know, it just says generators, regulators, water pumps, fuel pumps. I guess this was just like the mechanic shop, and then the convenience store would have been over there. So what would have been going on in the old mechanics shop? Okay, we've already talked about the 60s and the 20s. Let's say it's the late 40s. What would these mechanics have been up to in here? Well, they would have had a radio. They would have been listening to Frank Sinatra or whoever was popular at that time, the Tommy Dorsey band. And there would have been some pinups hanging on the walls. Isn't Marilyn Monroe, I think she did those sexy pinups, those nude pinups even, in the late 40s, or maybe it was the early 50s. So they might have had a calendar like that hanging up. And then in this room here, it looks like this is where the service bay was. I mean, isn't that what that is? You would have driven your car over that, and then the grease monkey down below decks would be reaching up, changing your oil. I mean, I'm guessing things were done like that back then as now. And then when payday came and these guys got their money, well, they were hot to trot, and so they all piled into their 1943 panel truck and headed down the highway toward Barstow, where there was all kind of liquor and fast women. Again, then as now. Okay, here's one more house in old Ludlow town that certainly looks worth checking out. And again, this was like, well, golly, this isn't a bad place at all. You know, considering California prices, this thing, in the condition it's in, is probably worth $300,000. Am I right? I mean, it's what you would call a fixer-upper. And the front door is wide open, extending an invitation to us all. Look at this. Holy cannoli. Wow, imagine the meals that were cooked up in this kitchen. Okay, for this place, we'll say we're in the 1950s. So that means Mom was standing at the stove, whipping up all those freakish dishes you used to see in the magazines back then, where everything was molded gelatin. Hey, what's for dinner, Mom? Molded liver pate again? Wow. The bathroom, there's still so many little touches in the bathroom, like that wallpaper. Look at this fancy little vanity. I mean, there was a whole medicine cabinet up here. Look at that. Glass, put your stuff in there. They probably had little sliding doors on it. A little storage under the sink, just big enough for Charles Manson to hide in. Okay, wow, there's a ton of fun ruins to poke through out here, but I couldn't find the ruins of the one building I was interested to find, which was the old cafe. And no, this isn't the cafe I'm talking about, which is pointing to this amazing place, which actually looks pretty awesome in itself. It's got all kinds of crazy antiques and stuff out front. Like, look at that. the Ludlow Mining Company, old ore carts, and some ginormous old insulators. Isn't that what those are? And there's a monument for the old TNT railroad that I was talking about earlier, with the logo, and a boarded up old building next door. I don't know if you would call that an old-timey SUV. It's not really a truck, it's not really a bus. I wouldn't call it a sedan. I don't know what they did call it. And then look at this, the old Ludlow fire truck. But anyway, even though this cafe looks super awesome, and I do actually plan to go inside because I'm camping tonight and I don't feel like futzing around with my stove. So I was gonna see if I could get some food to go. But before I go in there, I really wanted to find this old time cafe, and since I didn't see it anywhere, well, apparently there was this Chinese family that operated a hotel and a cafe called the Desert Inn, I think. It was a guy named Li Yim and his wife and his kids, and they lived here from like, God, I want to say they moved here in like 1914 to 1960. I think he originally came out here to work a mining claim of his own. He had his own mining claim for aluminum out in, well, what's now the Mojave Preserve by the Kelso Dunes. So I guess you can't go check that out anymore. But I don't know, maybe the mine played out, whatever. He and his family moved here to Ludlow and opened this cafe. And they lived here until 1960, which I think is absolutely amazing. I mean, there's a long history of Chinese immigrants coming to this part of the country in particular to work on the railroads. And so before I go in that cafe, there's something I want to check out a little bit farther down Route 66. Somebody tipped me off that there's supposedly an old Chinese railroad workers dugout house down there. And while I doubt there's anything very interesting to look at now, I figure I might as well go take a look before I get something to eat. Okay. Yikes, real loud down here because there's a giant train passing by. But according to my intel, there's some kind of old Chinese railroad workers bunker right on the other side of the tracks. Now, unfortunately, the end of this train is nowhere in sight, so there's no telling how long it would take me to stand here and wait before I could get across. But lucky for us, there's a culvert running right under the tracks, and I'm not tall, so I can just make it through. You guys aren't scared to be in a culvert under a set of railroad tracks that a giant freight train is on top of right now. I mean, can you feel the weight that's on top of us? Yikes, it is kind of freaky because you can hear the train rattling and bunking and thunking, and I know it weighs many, many, many thousands of pounds. But look, we made it to the other side of the tunnel and the other side of the tracks, and we didn't have to wait for the dang train. Okay, I'm guessing this is the thing that my intel person told me might be a Chinese railroad workers dugout home, which it very clearly is not. It's just an old-timey culvert made out of railroad ties. I guess maybe the railroad used to go up here along this berm, and back in the day, that's how they made culverts. You know, they didn't have steel pipe, they just had to use old railroad ties. So that's all it is. Kind of a bust, I'll admit it. But it's like I always say, if you don't go, you'll never know. And now we know. All right, so I guess this lonely little bunker had nothing to do with Li Yim. I don't know where the cafe is that Li Yim and his family used to operate. But I do know that the Ludlow Cafe is still open, and I do know that I don't feel like cooking dinner. So we gotta make our way all the way back through this culvert, underneath this freight train, and head back down the road to Ludlow to get some grub. Pretty cool spot though. Oh man, it's closed. Oh, if I wouldn't have driven out to check out that Chinese railroad dugout house, I would have been able to go in here and get a delicious cheeseburger. I don't know, I looked at the menu online and they didn't have carne asada fries. So I guess it's not that big of a loss. But it would have been neat to go in here because the pictures I saw on Yelp made it look like a really cool old-fashioned diner. In fact, you can kind of see looking through the door. Oh, well, you can't win them all. And I guess on the plus side, this just gives me another reason to come back to fabulous Ludlow. Seriously, I can't recommend this place enough. It is definitely worth getting off I-44. So next time you're driving down Interstate 40 from Kingman to Barstow, get off and take a look at Ludlow. You'll be glad you did.